Your wife won't let your daughter walk. The desperate words of 12-year-old Marcus Thompson echoed through the private garage of Tariq al-Mansouri's Beverly Hills mansion, causing the 47-year-old oil magnate to drop his Italian leather briefcase in shock. The homeless African-American boy, thin from malnutrition and wearing clothes that hadn't been washed in weeks, stood defiantly between Tariq and his custom Bentley, his dark eyes blazing with an urgency that made the billionaire's blood run cold. For 3 months, Marcus had been living in the abandoned construction site behind the al-Mansouri estate, surviving on scraps and watching the comings and goings of one of Los Angeles's wealthiest families. But what he had observed through the mansion's windows had filled him with a rage that overcame his fear of the powerful man standing before him. "Get away from my car, you little vagrant," Tariq shouted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "Security will remove you from my property and have you arrested for trespassing." But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook from his torn jacket, its pages filled with careful handwriting that would have surprised anyone who assumed a homeless child couldn't read or write. "I've been watching your family for 3 months, sir," Marcus said with a calmness that belied his desperate circumstances. "I've seen what your wife does to Yasmin when you're not home. I've seen how she keeps your daughter from walking even though she can." The mention of his 8-year-old daughter's name made Tariq pause. Yasmin had been diagnosed with a mild form of muscular dystrophy 2 years earlier, a condition that weakened her leg muscles but didn't prevent mobility with proper support and therapy. However, despite the best medical care money could buy, Yasmin remained confined to a wheelchair, growing weaker instead of stronger, despite treatments that should have been helping her improve. The family had consulted with specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and even flew to Switzerland for experimental treatments that cost over $500,000. Yet none of these expensive interventions had produced any improvement, and several doctors had begun suggesting that Yasmin's condition was more severe than initially diagnosed. "You don't know anything about my family's medical situation," Tariq said, but his voice lacked its previous conviction. His daughter's lack of progress had been troubling him for months, especially since her doctors continued to express optimism about her prognosis, while she seemed to be getting worse rather than better. The contradiction between medical expectations and observable reality had been eating at him, but Helena had always provided reasonable explanations about setbacks, complications, and the unpredictable nature of Yasmin's condition. Marcus opened his notebook to a page covered with dates and detailed observations. October 15th, he read aloud, "Your wife gave Yasmin medicine from a bottle that wasn't prescribed by her doctor. I saw her hiding the real medicine in the kitchen cabinet and giving her something else instead." October 22nd, when Yasmin tried to stand up during physical therapy, your wife told the therapist that she was having a bad day and needed to rest. October 29th, I watched your wife tell Yasmin that trying to walk would hurt her and make her condition worse, even though the little girl was begging to try. Tariq felt a chill run down his spine as Marcus continued reading from his notebook. November 5th, Yasmin was playing in the backyard and managed to stand up from her wheelchair to reach a ball that had rolled away. She stood for almost a minute and took 3 steps before your wife came running out and told her she was having dangerous muscle spasms. November 12th, I saw your wife meet with a man who isn't one of Yasmin's doctors. She gave him money, and he gave her pills that she put in Yasmin's medicine bottles. November 19th, when the physical therapist reported that Yasmin's reflexes were improving, your wife called the doctor and said Yasmin was showing signs of severe fatigue and needed to reduce her therapy sessions. His wife, Helena al-Mansouri, had been Yasmin's primary caregiver since the diagnosis, managing her medications, overseeing her therapy sessions, and making medical decisions when he was traveling for business. As a former nurse who had worked in pediatric care before their marriage, Helena had convinced him that she was better qualified than anyone to manage their daughter's care. She had taken charge of coordinating with specialists, researching new treatments, and maintaining detailed medical records that impressed even the most experienced physicians. But Marcus's observations were describing behavior that contradicted everything Helena had told him about Yasmin's condition and treatment. "You're lying," Tariq said. But even as he spoke the words, doubt was creeping into his voice. A homeless child wouldn't have access to such detailed information about his family's private life unless he had actually been watching them for months. And the specific dates and incidents Marcus described were too precise and too numerous to be fabricated by someone trying to scam money from a wealthy family. The boy's notebook contained dozens of entries, each one documenting specific interactions between Helena and Yasmin that Tariq had never witnessed because they occurred when he was away on business trips. Marcus pulled out another item from his jacket, a small digital camera that looked like it had been salvaged from somewhere. "I have pictures," he said simply. "Pictures of your wife switching your daughter's medications. Pictures of her holding Yasmin down when she tries to get out of her wheelchair. Pictures of her meeting with people who aren't doctors but who she pays money to keep quiet about something. Pictures of her throwing away the real medicine and replacing it with different pills. Pictures of her telling Yasmin that she's getting sicker when the little girl is actually trying to get better." Tariq's hands trembled as he reached for the camera. The first image showed Helena in Yasmin's bedroom at night, clearly switching medication bottles while the child slept. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 nights earlier. The second showed Helena physically restraining Yasmin when the girl attempted to stand during what appeared to be a therapy session, with Helena's face showing anger rather than concern. The third showed Helena meeting with an unidentified man in a hospital parking garage, exchanging what appeared to be cash for a bag of pills. The fourth image showed Helena disposing of Yasmin's prescribed medications in a dumpster behind a pharmacy, while keeping different pills that had been given to her by the unknown man. "How did you get these pictures?" Tariq whispered, staring at evidence that his wife had been systematically deceiving him about their daughter's condition and treatment. The images were clear and undeniable, showing behavior that contradicted every conversation he had ever had with Helena about Yasmin's care. More disturbing was the calculated nature of Helena's actions in the photographs, suggesting this wasn't neglect or misunderstanding, but deliberate deception carried out over an extended period. Marcus looked down at his worn sneakers before meeting Tariq's eyes again. "Because nobody pays attention to homeless kids, especially black ones. I can go anywhere, see anything, and people act like I'm invisible. I've been watching your family because I was trying to figure out if you were good people or bad people before I asked for help. What I found out is that your little girl needs help, and her own mother is the one hurting her." The desperation in Marcus's voice was genuine, and Tariq realized that this child had been living rough for months while conducting what amounted to a sophisticated surveillance operation motivated not by personal gain, but by concern for a vulnerable child he had never even met. "But there's more," Marcus continued, pulling out additional pages from his notebook. "I followed your wife to places she told you were medical appointments. Half of them weren't real doctor visits. She was meeting with people who used to be doctors but aren't allowed to practice anymore. People who were kicked out of medicine for hurting patients or stealing money. She's paying them to give her drugs that make Yasmin sicker instead of better, and they're helping her fake medical records to make it look like Yasmin's condition is getting worse." At that moment, the sound of a car engine approaching made both Marcus and Tariq turn toward the street. Helena's white Mercedes was pulling into the driveway, returning from what she had told Tariq was a consultation with a new neurologist who specialized in progressive muscular disorders. But Marcus grabbed Tariq's arm with surprising strength for such a thin child. "Don't let her know I told you," he pleaded. "She'll hurt Yasmin worse if she finds out someone is watching. You have to be smart about this, or your daughter will never walk again. She's been planning this for a long time, and she's got backup plans to make sure nobody can prove what she's doing." Marcus pulled out yet another set of documents from his jacket, papers that looked like they had been photocopied from official sources. "She's been stealing from the medical fund you set up for Yasmin's treatment," he explained quickly. "Over $2 million has been moved to accounts that your wife controls, but she's made it look like the money is still being used for medical expenses. She's buying fake receipts from the people she's working with, creating fake medical bills, and even paying for fake insurance claims that make it look like Yasmin is getting more expensive treatment than she really island." What none of them knew was that Helena Al-Mansouri had been systematically poisoning her own daughter for over a year, using her nursing knowledge to administer drugs that weakened Yasmin's muscles while appearing to treat her condition. The scheme was designed to keep Yasmin permanently disabled so that Helena could maintain control over the family's medical decisions and access to Tariq's wealth through the substantial medical trust fund he had established. But Marcus had documented evidence that would expose not just Helena's abuse, but her connection to a network of corrupt medical professionals who helped wealthy spouses maintain control over family members through deliberate medical sabotage. Helena's plan was even more sinister than simple financial fraud. She had been gradually increasing the dosage of muscle-weakening drugs while documenting Yasmin's deterioration as evidence of disease progression. Her ultimate goal was to convince Tariq that Yasmin needed to be institutionalized in a specialized care facility that Helena had financial interests in, which would give her complete control over both Yasmin's life and the medical funds, while eliminating any witnesses to her abuse. The fake medical consultations were part of building a case for this institutionalization, with corrupted former doctors providing false expert opinions about Yasmin's need for residential care. If you want to know how a homeless 12-year-old outsmarted a criminal conspiracy that nearly destroyed an innocent child, subscribe to the channel, because what Marcus reveals next will expose a web of deception that reaches the highest levels of Los Angeles society and threatens to destroy everything Tariq thought he knew about the people he trusted most. Tariq quickly ushered Marcus into the garage's side room as Helena's footsteps approached. Through the window, they could see her helping Yasmin out of the car, the 8-year-old girl looking noticeably weaker than she had just a week earlier. But what struck Tariq most was how Helena seemed to be deliberately preventing Yasmin from putting any weight on her legs, even when the child appeared to be trying to stand on her own. Helena's body language showed none of the gentle encouragement that Tariq would have expected from a caring mother, instead displaying what looked like deliberate discouragement of any independence attempts. Marcus whispered urgently, "Watch how she handles her. See how she makes Yasmin think she's too weak to try walking, even though I've seen your daughter standing up when her mother isn't around. I've been watching through the windows at night when Yasmin thinks nobody can see her. She's been practicing walking in her room, holding onto furniture and taking steps. But every morning her mother convinces her that she imagined it, or that it was dangerous. The psychological manipulation is almost worse than the physical abuse, because she's making Yasmin believe that her own body is betraying her." Tariq watched in horror, as Helena indeed seemed to be discouraging Yasmin's attempts at independence. When the child reached for the garage door frame to pull herself up, Helena quickly redirected her back to the wheelchair, telling her that she was having a bad day and needed to conserve her energy. When Yasmin asked why her legs felt different than usual, Helena told her it was just the medication making her feel confused about her real capabilities, and that trying to walk when she felt this way could cause permanent damage to her nervous system. The interaction that Tariq had previously seen as protective care now looked like deliberate sabotage of his daughter's recovery. Helena's responses to Yasmin's questions were designed to create fear and dependency rather than encourage recovery and independence. Every time Yasmin showed curiosity about her physical capabilities, Helena redirected her attention to her limitations and disabilities. Every time Yasmin expressed hope about improvement, Helena reminded her of the progressive nature of her condition and the importance of accepting realistic limitations. Marcus showed him more entries from his notebook. November 5th. He read quietly, "Your wife met with a man in a white coat behind the medical building downtown. She gave him money, and he gave her pills that aren't the ones your daughter is supposed to be taking. I followed him afterward and found out he used to be a doctor, but lost his license for prescribing dangerous drugs to patients who didn't need them. November 12th. I followed them to a fake doctor's appointment. The man she met with isn't a real doctor anymore. He's been kicked out of medicine for hurting patients, but he's helping your wife make it look like Yasmin is getting treatment from legitimate specialists." The implications hit Tariq like a physical blow. His wife hadn't just been neglecting their daughter's care. She had been actively working to worsen Yasmin's condition while making it appear that she was receiving the best possible treatment from the most qualified specialists. The expensive medical consultations, the specialized equipment, the round-the-clock care that had cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, all of it had been an elaborate deception designed to keep Yasmin disabled and dependent while enriching Helena and her criminal associates. But why? Tariq asked, his voice breaking with the enormity of what he was learning. Why would Helena want to keep Yasmin sick? What could she possibly gain from making our daughter suffer? Marcus pulled out newspaper clippings that he had apparently been collecting for months, articles about medical fraud, insurance scams, and cases where family members had been abused by relatives who controlled their medical care. Because if Yasmin gets better and doesn't need constant medical care, your wife loses her excuse to control all the medical decisions and money. I found out that she's been stealing from the accounts you set up for Yasmin's treatment. She's been using your daughter's disability to steal millions of dollars, and if Yasmin recovers, people will start asking questions about where all that money went. Marcus showed him financial documents that he had somehow obtained through what appeared to be careful investigation of public records and possibly some less legal methods of information gathering. The papers showed transactions from Yasmin's medical trust fund that had been diverted to accounts controlled by Helena, investments made with funds designated for medical care, and payments to individuals and organizations that had no legitimate connection to Yasmin's treatment. Over 18 months, nearly $3 million intended for Yasmin's care had been redirected to investments, properties, and accounts that Helena had established without his knowledge. The scheme was sophisticated and would have been almost impossible to detect without the kind of detailed surveillance that Marcus had been conducting. Helena had been creating false medical expenses to justify withdrawals from the trust fund, then diverting the money to her own accounts while providing Yasmin with cheaper, ineffective, or actually harmful treatments. She had been billing insurance companies for treatments that never occurred, prescriptions that were never filled correctly, and consultations with doctors who were either fake or who had been paid to provide false information about Yasmin's condition. "How did you get all this information?" Tariq asked, amazed that a homeless child had uncovered financial fraud that had escaped his own accountants and lawyers. The documents Marcus had provided showed a level of investigation and analysis that would have challenged professional forensic accountants. Yet this 12-year-old had compiled the evidence while living on the streets and surviving on scraps. Marcus smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "Before I became homeless, my mom was a paralegal who specialized in medical malpractice cases. She taught me how to research public records, how to follow paper trails, how to recognize when medical treatments don't match what they're supposed to do, and how to spot the signs of medical abuse and fraud. When she died in a car accident and I ended up in the foster system, then on the streets when that didn't work out, I used those skills to survive by figuring out which people were safe to ask for help and which ones were dangerous." He continued, "When I started watching your family, I thought you might be one of the good ones, because Yasmin seemed like a sweet kid who deserved better than what she was getting. But the more I watched, the more I realized that the person hurting her was the one who was supposed to be protecting her. So I started documenting everything, following your wife, researching the fake doctors she was meeting with, tracking where the money was going, and learning about similar cases where parents or spouses kept family members sick for money or control. I've got enough evidence to put her in prison for 20 years, but only if we're smart about how we expose her." Marcus explained that his investigation had revealed Helena's connections to a network of corrupt individuals who specialized in different aspects of medical fraud and family abuse. There were former doctors who had lost their licenses but continued practicing illegally, pharmaceutical suppliers who provided drugs without proper prescriptions, medical equipment companies that billed for devices that were never delivered, and even corrupt social workers and disability advocates who helped create false documentation of patients' conditions and needs. At that moment, Helena's voice could be heard calling for Tariq from inside the house. But before he could respond, Marcus grabbed his arm again, with urgency that went beyond his previous warnings. "If you confront her now, she'll destroy the evidence and probably hurt Yasmin to cover her tracks. She's already been increasing the doses of the drug she's giving Yasmin, and I think she's planning to make it look like Yasmin's condition is getting so bad that she needs to be put in some kind of institution. Once Yasmin is out of the house and under Helena's complete control, nobody will be able to protect her or investigate what's really happening." Marcus showed him additional documentation that revealed the true scope of Helena's plan. She had been researching residential care facilities for disabled children, specifically ones that were located far from Los Angeles, and had histories of accepting patients without extensive independent medical verification. She had been in contact with administrators at these facilities, discussing Yasmin's case and preparing them for a potential admission. Most disturbing, she had been consulting with lawyers about establishing more comprehensive control over Yasmin's medical and financial decisions, ostensibly to better manage her care, but actually to eliminate any outside oversight of her treatment. "You need to be smart about this," Marcus continued. "Let me show you how to catch her in the act, so that when you call the police and the FBI, she can't talk her way out of it or destroy the evidence. I've been planning this confrontation for weeks, figuring out how to make sure that when the truth comes out, there's no way for her to escape or hurt Yasmin in the process." What Tariq didn't know was that Marcus had been living on the streets for 8 months since his mother's death, surviving by using intelligence and observation skills that exceeded those of trained investigators. His documentation of Helena's crimes was so thorough and methodical that it would not only expose her abuse of Yasmin, but reveal her connection to a network of corrupt medical professionals who helped wealthy individuals commit insurance fraud and family abuse through medical manipulation. The evidence Marcus had collected would ultimately lead to the exposure of dozens of similar cases and revolutionize how authorities investigate medical abuse in wealthy families. Marcus had also been in secret contact with legitimate medical professionals and law enforcement officials, building a case that would ensure Helena's conviction while protecting Yasmin from further harm. His investigation had uncovered similar patterns of abuse in other wealthy families, suggesting that Helena's network was part of a larger criminal organization that specialized in exploiting disabled family members for financial gain. That evening, following Marcus's carefully planned strategy, Tariq pretended to leave for a business trip, but instead hid in the house's security room where he could observe Helena's interactions with Yasmin through the internal camera system. Marcus, who had been given temporary shelter in the guest house after Tariq realized the boy's information was accurate, monitored the situation from outside and communicated with Tariq through text messages on a secure phone that couldn't be traced or intercepted by Helena. What they witnessed over the next several hours was horrifying and would provide the evidence needed to ensure Helena's conviction on multiple felony charges. As soon as Helena believed Tariq was gone, her entire demeanor toward Yasmin changed. Instead of the caring, attentive mother she portrayed when Tariq was present, she became cold, manipulative, and psychologically abusive, using sophisticated tactics to convince Yasmin that any attempts at independent movement were dangerous and painful. When Yasmin tried to stand up from her wheelchair to reach a book on a low shelf, Helena immediately rushed over and told her that her legs were too weak and that trying to walk could cause permanent damage to her nervous system. But instead of helping Yasmin reach the book, Helena moved it farther away and told Yasmin that she needed to learn to accept her limitations and stop trying to do things that were dangerous for someone in her condition. The psychological manipulation was systematic and cruel. Helena told Yasmin that the physical therapy exercises she enjoyed were actually making her condition worse, that the improvement she thought she was feeling was just her imagination, and that her desire to walk was a dangerous delusion that could lead to serious injury if she acted on it. She convinced Yasmin that her own body was unreliable and that she needed to depend entirely on Helena's judgment about what she could and couldn't do. But most damning was what happened during Yasmin's evening medication routine. Instead of giving her the prescribed muscle-strengthening supplements and anti-inflammatory medications that her real doctors had ordered, Helena substituted them with muscle relaxants and drugs that would make Yasmin weaker and more dependent on the wheelchair. She then carefully documented in Yasmin's medical chart that the child had taken the correct medications and was showing concerning signs of disease progression, creating false medical records that would support her claims about Yasmin's deteriorating condition. Marcus texted Tariq from outside, "She's going to give Yasmin the fake medicine now. The pills in the bottle labeled for muscle strength are actually muscle weakeners that she gets from the fake doctor. After Yasmin takes them, she'll be too weak to try walking tomorrow, and your wife will tell you that she's getting worse and needs more expensive treatment. But watch what else she does. She's going to call one of her fake doctors and report that Yasmin is showing signs of needing institutional care." Tariq watched through the cameras as Helena indeed administered pills that made Yasmin immediately drowsy and weak. Within minutes, his daughter went from trying to move around independently to barely being able to hold her head up. But what was even more disturbing was how Helena seemed satisfied with this transformation, documenting Yasmin's weakness as evidence of disease progression rather than the result of deliberate poisoning. As predicted by Marcus, Helena then made a phone call to one of her criminal associates, discussing Yasmin's supposed deterioration and the possibility that she might need residential care sooner than originally planned. The conversation was recorded by surveillance equipment that Marcus had helped Tariq install, providing audio evidence of Helena's criminal conspiracy and her plans to institutionalize Yasmin to gain complete control over her life and medical funds. The next morning, Helena called Tariq to report that Yasmin had experienced a significant decline overnight and would need to see additional specialists who would likely recommend more aggressive and expensive treatments. She suggested that they might need to consider residential care options if Yasmin's condition continued to deteriorate at this rate. But instead of rushing home in panic as he would have done before Marcus's revelation, Tariq was now armed with the knowledge that his wife was deliberately causing the deterioration she was reporting. Working with Marcus, who had become an unlikely partner in exposing Helena's crimes, Tariq began documenting her deception while secretly working with Yasmin's real doctors to understand what was actually happening to his daughter. What they discovered was that Yasmin's original diagnosis had been accurate. She did have a mild form of muscular dystrophy that should have responded well to treatment and allowed her to maintain significant mobility with proper care. However, the drugs Helena had been substituting were not only preventing her recovery, but actively worsening her condition in ways that mimicked the progression of a more severe form of the disease. The muscle relaxants were causing the weakness that Helena reported as disease progression. The sedatives were causing the fatigue and confusion that Helena claimed were neurological symptoms. The dietary supplements Helena was giving Yasmin actually contained compounds that interfered with muscle function and nerve transmission. Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric neurologist who had been consulted without Helena's knowledge, reviewed Yasmin's medical history and was shocked by what she found. Mr. Al-Mansouri, she told Tariq, during a confidential consultation, your daughter should be walking with minimal assistance by now. The treatment protocol she's supposedly been following should have maintained and even improved her muscle strength. The fact that she's getting weaker instead of better suggests either that the diagnosis was wrong, which I doubt based on her original test results, or that she's not receiving the treatment that's being documented in her medical records. Dr. Chen continued, what's even more concerning is that some of the symptoms being reported don't match the pattern we would expect to see with muscular dystrophy. The type of weakness and neurological effects that are being documented look more like the result of drug interactions or possibly even intentional poisoning. I would strongly recommend independent testing of your daughter's blood and urine to determine what medications she's actually been receiving. Marcus had been right about everything. Helena's elaborate deception had been designed to steal money while keeping Yasmin disabled enough to justify continued medical expenses and Helena's control over the family's medical decisions. But the scheme went deeper than anyone had initially realized. Helena's fake doctors were part of a network that specialized in helping wealthy individuals commit various forms of medical fraud, from insurance scams to maintaining control over family members through deliberate medical sabotage. The evidence Marcus had collected included recordings of Helena's conversations with her co-conspirators, financial records showing the diversion of millions of dollars from Yasmin's medical fund, photographic proof of medication switching and fake medical consultations, and documentation of the psychological abuse Helena used to maintain control over Yasmin's perception of her own capabilities. His surveillance had been so thorough that prosecutors would later describe it as superior to most professional investigations. After 2 weeks of careful documentation and working with law enforcement, Tariq was ready to confront Helena with evidence that she couldn't deny or explain away. But Marcus insisted on one final step that would ensure Helena couldn't hurt Yasmin during the confrontation or destroy evidence after being caught. The plan they developed would not only expose Helena's crimes, but ensure that Yasmin was immediately protected and that the entire criminal network was dismantled. On a Saturday morning when Helena believed Tariq was playing golf, FBI agents simultaneously raided her storage unit where she kept falsified medical records, her fake doctor's office where illegal medications were being manufactured and distributed, several bank accounts where stolen funds had been deposited, and the homes of her co-conspirators, who had been helping her maintain the elaborate deception. The coordinated raids were designed to prevent any destruction of evidence and ensure that all members of the criminal network were arrested simultaneously. At the same time, Tariq confronted Helena in their home, with Marcus present as a witness and real medical professionals standing by to immediately begin proper treatment for Yasmin. The confrontation was recorded by cameras that Marcus had installed throughout the house, ensuring that Helena's reactions and any admissions she made would be available as evidence in her prosecution. "Helena," Tariq said calmly, his voice carrying a coldness she had never heard before, "I know what you've been doing to our daughter. I know about the fake medications, the stolen money, the fake doctors, the psychological abuse, and your plan to institutionalize Yasmin so you could have complete control over her life and medical funds. It's over. The FBI has been investigating you for weeks, and they have enough evidence to send you to prison for the rest of your life." Helena's first response was to attempt the same manipulation tactics she had been using on Yasmin, trying to convince Tariq that he was being irrational and that she had dedicated her life to caring for their daughter. "Tariq, you're being ridiculous," she said, her voice taking on the same false concern she used when gaslighting Yasmin. "I've sacrificed everything for Yasmin's care. Every decision I've made has been in her best interest. You're letting some homeless child fill your head with paranoid fantasies because you feel guilty about not being here more often." But her protest died when Marcus stepped forward with his notebook, camera, and boxes of evidence that documented every aspect of her criminal activities. "Mrs. Al-Mansouri," Marcus said with a dignity that belied his youth and circumstances, "I have 8 months of evidence documenting everything you've done. I have pictures of you switching medications, recordings of you meeting with fake doctors, copies of financial records showing you stealing from your own daughter's medical fund, and video evidence of you psychologically abusing Yasmin to keep her dependent on you. The FBI has all of it now, and there's nowhere for you to run or hide." Helena's composure finally cracked when she realized that a homeless child had not only outwitted her elaborate criminal scheme, but had provided law enforcement with enough evidence to ensure her conviction on multiple felony charges. The woman who had spent months portraying herself as a devoted mother was revealed to be a calculating criminal who had been systematically abusing her own daughter for financial gain and psychological control. But the most dramatic moment came when Dr. Chen, who had been waiting in the next room with Child Protective Services workers and legitimate medical staff, began examining Yasmin with Marcus observing to ensure no one interfered with the child's attempts to demonstrate her actual capabilities. Within hours of being taken off Helena's fake medications and given proper treatment, Yasmin began showing signs of improved muscle strength and coordination that had been suppressed by the drugs Helena had been administering. "Daddy," Yasmin said with wonder in her voice as the muscle relaxants began wearing off, "my legs feel different. They feel stronger than they have in months. Can I try to walk to you?" The question that had been forbidden for months by Helena's manipulation was now answered by Dr. Chen's enthusiastic encouragement. With proper support and the real medications she should have been taking all along, Yasmin took her first independent steps in over a year, walking directly into her father's arms, while Helena was handcuffed and arrested by FBI agents who had been monitoring the confrontation. The transformation in Yasmin's condition over the following weeks was remarkable and provided additional evidence of the extent of Helena's abuse. With proper medical care and without the drugs that had been systematically weakening her, she regained mobility that exceeded even Dr. Chen's optimistic projections. The mild muscular dystrophy that should have allowed her to maintain significant independence had been artificially worsened by nearly 2 years of deliberate medical sabotage. Within a month, Yasmin was walking independently, participating in age-appropriate physical activities, and showing intellectual and emotional development that had been suppressed by the medications Helena had been giving her. The psychological effects of Helena's abuse took longer to overcome, but with proper therapy and support, Yasmin began to trust her own perceptions of her physical capabilities and regain confidence in her ability to make decisions about her own body and activities. Helena Al-Mansouri was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for child abuse, medical fraud, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping related to her plans to institutionalize Yasmin. The network of fake medical professionals she had been working with was completely dismantled. With over 30 arrests and the recovery of more than $50 million in fraudulent billing from insurance companies and families who had been victimized by similar schemes, the investigation revealed that Helena's criminal activities extended far beyond her abuse of Yasmin. She had been part of a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in medical fraud, targeting wealthy families with disabled or elderly members. The network included corrupt former medical professionals, illegal pharmaceutical suppliers, fraudulent medical equipment companies, and even some legitimate doctors who had been bribed or blackmailed into participating in the schemes. But the real hero of the story was Marcus Thompson, the homeless 12-year-old whose intelligence, courage, and determination had saved Yasmin's life and exposed a criminal conspiracy that law enforcement had been unable to detect despite years of operation. His investigation had been more thorough and effective than official law enforcement investigations, and his evidence was so compelling that it led to the largest medical fraud prosecution in California history. Tariq not only provided Marcus with a permanent home and the best education money could buy, but established the Marcus Thompson Foundation for Medical Advocacy and Child Protection, a national organization dedicated to training young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to recognize and report medical abuse and fraud. The foundation's approach was revolutionary, recognizing that society's most marginalized members were often its most valuable witnesses to crimes committed by powerful individuals who believed they were above suspicion or investigation. The Marcus Thompson Foundation became a national model for protecting vulnerable individuals from medical exploitation, with Marcus himself serving as its youth director and training thousands of other young people to use observation and documentation skills to protect community members who were being victimized by corrupt medical professionals, abusive family members, and fraudulent care providers. The Foundation's investigators, many of them formerly homeless or disadvantaged youth, achieved success rates that exceeded those of traditional law enforcement agencies because they could access information and observe behavior that was invisible to conventional investigators. 5 years later, Yasmin was not only walking independently, but participating in competitive swimming, martial arts, and academic programs for gifted children. Her recovery had been so complete that many medical professionals who studied her case concluded that she had never actually had muscular dystrophy at all, but had been the victim of a sophisticated poisoning scheme designed to mimic the symptoms of the disease. She became an advocate for other children who might be victims of medical abuse, using her experience to help identify families where similar crimes might be occurring. Marcus had graduated at the top of his high school class and been accepted to Harvard University with a full scholarship to study criminal justice and medical ethics. His foundation work had expanded internationally, with similar programs being established in 12 countries to protect vulnerable individuals from medical exploitation and family abuse. He was recognized as one of the world's leading experts on detecting and preventing medical fraud, despite having never attended medical school or law enforcement academy. Helena remained in federal prison, her medical license permanently revoked, and her stolen assets seized to pay restitution to her victims. Her criminal associates received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years, and the medical equipment and pharmaceutical companies that participated in the fraud paid over $300 million in fines and settlements. But more importantly, the exposure of their crimes led to systemic changes that protected thousands of children from similar victimization. During a congressional hearing on medical fraud and family abuse, Marcus testified about the importance of listening to voices that society typically ignores. Often, he told the committee, the people who can see what's really happening are the ones who are considered invisible or unimportant. Homeless children, domestic workers, elderly patients, disabled individuals, we're all witnesses to things that powerful people think nobody notices. But we do notice, and when someone finally listens to us, we can expose crimes that expensive investigators and sophisticated surveillance systems miss because they're not looking in the right places or asking the right questions. Marcus continued, "The reason I was able to expose Helena's crimes when professional investigators couldn't is that she never thought a homeless black kid was worth worrying about. She was so focused on hiding her activities from people she considered important that she completely ignored someone she considered worthless. But that invisibility became my greatest asset, because it allowed me to see everything she was doing without her taking any precautions to hide it from me. Tariq, sitting beside Marcus as he testified, reflected on how close he had come to losing his daughter forever because he had trusted credentials and social status over observable evidence and moral character. The homeless child he had initially tried to chase away from his property had demonstrated more integrity, intelligence, and genuine care for Yasmin's welfare than the medical professionals he had been paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to treat her. The committee's questions revealed the full scope of what Marcus had accomplished through his investigation. Committee members were amazed to learn that a 12-year-old living on the streets had compiled evidence that professional investigators had missed, had infiltrated a criminal network that had operated undetected for years, and had saved not just one child, but potentially hundreds of others who might have become victims of similar schemes. The hearing led to comprehensive federal legislation known as the Marcus Thompson Act, which established new protections for vulnerable individuals against medical abuse, created funding for community-based advocacy programs, and required medical institutions to implement oversight systems that could detect the kind of systematic abuse that Helena had perpetrated. The act also established legal protections for individuals who report suspected medical abuse, recognizing that witnesses to these crimes often come from marginalized communities whose voices are traditionally ignored by authorities. Marcus's story became a case study taught in medical schools, law enforcement academies, and social work programs across the country. His methods of surveillance and documentation were adapted for use by professional investigators, and his insights into how criminals exploit society's blind spots toward marginalized individuals revolutionized approaches to detecting white-collar crime and family abuse. The foundation he established with Tariq's support grew into an international organization with chapters in 25 countries. The Marcus Thompson Foundation trained over 10,000 young advocates who worked in their communities to identify and report various forms of abuse and fraud. These advocates, many of them formerly homeless or otherwise disadvantaged, achieved remarkable success rates because they could access information and build trust with vulnerable populations in ways that traditional authorities could not. 10 years after Marcus had confronted Tariq in his garage, both he and Yasmin stood before the United Nations General Assembly to address global efforts to combat medical abuse and protect vulnerable individuals from exploitation by family members and caregivers. Marcus, now 22 and completing his medical degree at Harvard, had become one of the world's leading experts on medical ethics and patient advocacy despite his unconventional path to expertise. Yasmin, now 18 and preparing to study law with a focus on children's rights, spoke eloquently about her experience as a survivor of medical abuse and her work helping other young people who had faced similar victimization. Her recovery had been so complete that she competed in national swimming championships and maintained a perfect academic record while dedicating significant time to advocacy work. In his address to the UN, Marcus emphasized the themes that had guided his work since that day in Tariq's garage. The most vulnerable members of our society are often our most valuable witnesses to injustice, he told the assembled delegates. Children, elderly individuals, disabled people, homeless individuals, domestic workers, and others who are considered invisible or unimportant by powerful people, often see crimes that sophisticated investigation systems miss because they're not looking in the right places or listening to the right voices. He continued, "My own experience taught me that expertise and moral authority don't always come from traditional sources. A homeless child can sometimes see things that trained professionals miss. A domestic worker might understand family dynamics better than licensed therapists. An elderly patient might recognize medical abuse that expensive specialists overlook. Our job as advocates and policymakers is to create systems that value these perspectives and protect the people brave enough to speak up when they witness injustice." Yasmin's remarks focused on the psychological impact of medical abuse and the importance of believing children when they report that something is wrong with their treatment. "The most damaging part of what my mother did to me wasn't just the physical harm from the wrong medications," she explained. "It was convincing me that I couldn't trust my own perceptions of my body and capabilities, Medical abusers use psychological manipulation to make their victims doubt their own experiences, which makes it extremely difficult for victims to seek help or for others to recognize what's happening. She added, "Marcus saved my life not just by documenting what my mother was doing, but by believing that what he was seeing was real and important, even when powerful adults dismissed his concerns." That's the lesson we need to teach everyone who works with vulnerable populations. Believe people when they tell you something is wrong, and pay attention to witnesses even when they come from backgrounds that society typically ignores. The UN session led to the adoption of international protocols for detecting and preventing medical abuse, with specific emphasis on training healthcare workers to recognize signs of systematic poisoning and psychological manipulation. The protocols also established international cooperation mechanisms for investigating medical fraud networks that operate across national boundaries. Helena al-Mansouri, meanwhile, remained in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Her case had become a textbook example of how trusted family members could exploit medical systems to commit elaborate fraud and abuse. Prison interviews revealed that she had shown no remorse for her actions and continued to maintain that she had been acting in Yasmin's best interests, demonstrating the psychological pathology that had enabled her to systematically abuse her own child for years. The criminal network she had been part of was completely dismantled, but investigations revealed that similar networks continued to operate in other locations, targeting wealthy families with vulnerable members. The ongoing work of the Marcus Thompson Foundation and similar organizations remained crucial for identifying and exposing these criminal enterprises before they could claim additional victims. Tariq al-Mansouri had transformed from a wealthy businessman who trusted expensive credentials over observable evidence into one of the world's leading advocates for vulnerable individuals who faced medical exploitation. He had divested himself of his oil investments and dedicated his wealth to funding advocacy programs, medical research into abuse detection, and legal support for families who discovered they had been victimized by corrupt medical professionals. His relationship with Marcus had evolved from that initial confrontation in the garage to a father-son bond that demonstrated how people from vastly different backgrounds could unite around shared values of justice and protection for the craft. Vulnerable. Tariq often spoke about how Marcus had not only saved Yasmin's life, but had taught him that wisdom and moral authority could come from the most unexpected sources. The story of Marcus Thompson and Yasmin al-Mansouri became a powerful reminder that society's most marginalized members often possess insights that could protect vulnerable individuals if powerful people had the humility to listen and report day. The courage to act on uncomfortable truths. Marcus's journey from homeless child to internationally recognized advocate proved that expertise could be earned through experience and dedication rather than just formal education and credentials. Their story continued to inspire advocacy movements around the world, demonstrating that one person's refusal to accept injustice could create ripple effects that protected thousands of others. The Marcus Thompson Foundation's motto, carved in stone at its headquarters, captured the essence of their philosophy. Truth comes from unexpected voices. Justice requires that we listen to those whom society overlooks. Every person has the power to save lives, if they have the courage to speak up and the determination to be heard. Helena al-Mansouri had tried to destroy her own daughter for money and control, but she was stopped by a homeless child whose moral clarity was stronger than any adult's criminal scheme. Marcus Thompson turned his own traumatic experiences into a mission that revolutionized how society protects its most vulnerable members, proving that the best revenge against those who abuse power is to build systems that make their crimes impossible to commit or conceal. If this story of unexpected heroism and triumph over corruption has moved you, remember that there are Marcus Thompsons in every community, young people whose intelligence and moral courage could protect vulnerable individuals if we had the wisdom to listen to their voices and the determination to act on their observations. Sometimes the most important truth comes from those whom powerful people consider least important to hear.